These questions are based on your text, once is for always. Are religions the product of masters or followers?
Religions are the products of practitioners that have experiences. And we don't know enough to call them masters or anything else at this point. We can assume that they have enough experience to lead people, which then that in itself creates followers. But because a person has a religion doesn't mean it's a master any more than a practitioner, or in some cases just merely a visionary who has experiences, and because they have the experiences and others don't, cause people, inspire people to follow them to wherever it goes. Religion, has an existence of itself on a certain level, a psychic experience. So religion then can be any kind of sacred worship or any kind of emotion that could be considered of a sacred nature. Any kind of experience can be considered that and have a religious quality to it. So when we say religion, we have to make very clear what we mean in terms of either an impulse towards sacredness or some kind of huge monstrosity of an organization as such. That could be then a more concrete version of a religion or a religious impulse or a sacred event, a sacred realization or a sacred way of life and so on.
Should any religion outlast its teachers or founders?
The question is should. Religions, because they are some kind of a system for recording experience, whether it's really spiritual or really human or really divine, is another issue. Okay? Now, in terms of outlasting, the question isn't exactly valid if they should outlast. Religion then, as an experience, as a certain kind of teaching or a dogma or an event, has a life of its own. It stays in the minds of others as long as it stays in the mind, and thus you have a memory of a religion, and that's probably the truth, and also the problem with many of the religious, let's say, teachings that exist on the planet today. They are merely memories. They're something to look back to, look up to, but look back to at the same time. And so a good idea should live forever, in fact. And so we're not saying that religions by themselves mean good ideas, but often if they are universal ideas, then they may stay here a lot longer than whoever was that spoke, revealed, or taught these ideas. And thus we have universal wisdom teachings that exist or arise in the consciousness of the individual from the spiritual plane that are related to religions in terms of a time and space for their manifestation, but are in fact beyond religions in terms of a real origin. Please.
So is a religion's basis then the teachings, or let's say the master who brings those teachings?
Some religions arise in terms of a native cultural phenomena, right, or a phenomenon as such. For instance, when fire just manifested, became kind of a religious experience for the people. See the fire, the light, the warmth, and so on, like a sunrise or sunset or a moon configuration of some sort, Luna. And then so we see that these things which are awe-inspiring became religious in nature, sacred events. And so we see an event then, an experience became the source of a certain religion rather than merely a master or a certain kind of teaching. So the event happened, like sex is a religious event, and that's why people like to make it like that. And they say, "Oh no, this is my religion. God gave it to me." And so, not a bad or wrong idea, but I think that's a question. Well, what's religious? Is it pleasurable then, or what is it? Stimulating? Is it shocking? Is it awe-inspiring? All of these things lead to religious feelings, religious perceptions. too much light, too much darkness lead to religious perception and religious inquiry, and all of these things are related to it. And then when we're talking about a master, then we're talking about someone who arises or enters the scene with a certain realization and force of destiny and purpose that is even beyond the person. And that's what we call a master. Whether or not the results are religious, catastrophic, scientific, or artistic is another question.
How then does a spiritually awakening being navigate through the huge amount of teachings and religions out there?
Well, what kind of person?
Spiritually awakening.
Oh, well, a spiritually awakening Pete doesn't have such a problem. It's a spiritually sleeping Pete that has that kind of problem. So you're talking about, the zombies and those who are awakening from zombieism into some level of ignorance, right? And that ignorance causes them to want to find a way to undo the ignorance, which is also painful, a form of darkness, and a form of, let us say, for some stupidity, and a form of making a lot of mistakes, a form of darkness for sure, right? Darkness, problems. See? And so under the pressure of these kinds of impediments or obstructions or barriers or negative feedback from what one does, and feeling pain from who one is with or what one believes and what one is doing to oneself or to others or as a way of life and so on, then of course this gives them feedback, and they begin to search and they want to find out what to do next and how to best go about what their problems may be, if they're handicapped or if they're disabled in some way. They want to know what's going on with that. And again, more deeply than that, we have areas of our own psyche, the astral plane, that lead to what we would have to say are religious or sacred experiences, which then, if other people can't give us answers, certain people, who we love may not have the wherewithal to make clear what we're going through. We have to step out of the circle of immediate influence or family influence or social culturing and try to find out who knows what's going on with us at the level it's going on. And so naturally, one thing leads to another, and you wind up maybe going to these different religious ideas of metaphysical trips or some kind of spiritual circle or circus, whatever may be available, and you begin a process of searching by way of pilgrimage till you find the right thing, if you don't already have instincts that help you to find that immediately. Sometimes it's your native religion, sometimes it's your native music, sometimes it's your family has all the religious answers for you. So it really depends on how much information you need that is not provided to you by your river of blood, your family, or your basic culturing. And then you'll go on this magical mystery tour in some cases. Then there are those who, out of intellectual curiosity, say, hey, there's nothing more beautiful or wonderful or fantastic than to go on a magical mystery tour of the mind and all the wonderful trips and ideas that the so-called spiritual people have found and have turned into religious organizations or movements. Or, even worse, businesses. Right? The Delancey Street syndrome. Right? Hey, where to get the best deal? Where to get the best whatever, guru, teaching at the cheapest rate. The best enlightenment, the quickest enlightenment at the best rate in town. Question. Make it a short question. Thank you.
Yes, if I may go back to something you mentioned earlier briefly. Are any of those things that you mentioned, like sex or the sun or the moon, or any kind of experience of any natural phenomenon, etc., a valid basis for what may be called a religion or spirituality or experience based upon the truly divine? And if not, what is or what are?
Well, any of the particular phenomena mentioned are not the divine. So that clears the field. In themselves, none of those things are the divine, which may then be translated into the total of the total itself as the divine. Everything into nothingness, into everything as the divine. the mystery, the transcendent paradox of itself. Cultic religions have been made out of anything, basically, you can think about, good and bad. Anthropological studies would reveal that, as well as the religious history, and so on. Please, next question.
Many religions invite their followers to form a, let's say, living relationship with a dead master or leader. Can you comment on the viability of such relationships?
In terms of Christianity, for instance,
Primarily,
it's a
yes.
good beginning. All of these kinds of teachings are great to have an idea of what is possible. Have an idea of how things began. Have an idea of how one doesn't want to end up. See, as a time, a beginning, and a tragic end, for whatever reasons. All of this is good for us to see what the pattern of human nature is, what the cultural basis is for certain kinds of searching techniques or methods are, or have been, are, and may still have to be for some people. Okay? So the Christian teaching is a spiritual teaching that could be considered a very profound, for some, first step, if they can get as far as realizing that some of the teachings are for the public, some of the teachings are for the disciples. Some of the teachings are even beyond the disciples, and so the function of the master as being valid is made clear in that particular teaching, and so you see the need for that today is very consistent with that particular teaching as an indication of what the function of a master could be or should be. Right? Depending on your culture, depending on your time, depending on your level of unfoldment, depending on how much you're willing to master, and whether or not your particular idea of a master is someone who goes bananas in the marketplace or not. And, needs to be crucified in front of everybody so that there's not a person who doesn't know who got crucified. So, you understand? So it really depends on what the drama is and what it's teaching you. And then we have to ask, well, is crucifixion even necessary? And what is the real difference it made then? Except that could be a very important point of conversation, discussion, and maybe a beginning of deep understanding. See? What is the wound, the real wound of God? What is it? See? What is it? What is the real wound of the heart? What's the real wound of love? And does it have to go public? Which I think certain biographies reveal that some peeps need to go public, whereas most of the masters that we can make reference to in terms of their esoteric function or non-public function have done things in secret and kept it in secret. Did not go before the public for any ostentatious or dramatic effect. It did not go before the public. And so you have what then are called secret masters. Masters who work underground and who are very intelligent and very wise as to the kind of chaos that can be created out of going public when, if you're a master, you know better, unless you want to bring hell on your people, you know better because you know the laws of vibration. If you go out there and say the wrong thing to the wrong peeps, especially in regards to this story, you should know better than to go before the Hebrew people and start making comments that unless you're really wanting to take the wrath that comes with that, then you won't have to do that. Furthermore, along the same lines of that story, if you come from a scriptural culture, as in the case of that particular song or let us say story of mastership is concerned, then you know that if you are the master, and you are divinely inspired, if you are, then from a scriptural societal viewpoint, make sure the first thing you do is put on papyrus or whatever, in word, written down, because if you descend from, let's say, the teachings of Moses, then you want to make sure that things are put where they are kept in perfect, precise recording, see? Either on tablets or on paper in some way that is definitively your teaching for all time's sake to eliminate confusion, chaos, and what may be called the aberration of interpretation, which is what may have gone on in that particular religious effort, which is a great religion. There's a lot of the heart involved, a certain kind of love, but most importantly, the story of a failed or a successful master, depending on your opinion. Continue.
And so how do we determine the success or failure of a religion? What criteria do we use?
Well, that depends on whether it gets to you in what way. You have to be the judge of that. If you are enlightened, if it enlightened you, you're successful. If you are beside yourself with happiness, it's successful, right? If you're beside yourself with creativity, it is successful. If it helped you to get into the levels of the God state, then it's a successful story, right? It delivered. Now, how many people can say that they've been delivered apart from dogma that they may have been forced to swallow because the so-called authority said, well, this is what it is, whether you know it or not, believe it or not, or accept it or not, this is what it has to be. Okay? What happens if spirit, not any one person, comes down and descends upon you, takes you up there to the higher planes, and reveals something entirely different to you? Try and bring that back to those religions. See what they say about that. Next question.
Organizations seem to commit to their own growth and continued existence, whether or not they remain true to their founding principles. So what is needed to keep a religion pure and true?
Well, since I'm not really a religious person, I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask about that exactly. But what is the quintessence of your question in terms of religion and what is true or not true, and being correct or not correct, depending on what you mean?
I guess what I'm asking is, all organizations seem to face a crossroads where they lose track of why they were founded in the beginning.
Well, that's not because of the religion. Let's set the record straight here. It's because of human nature. Human nature is the fault, not a religious impulse by itself. Right? Just like with sexuality, it's human nature is a sinful one, not the sexual impulse by itself. So we have to be very clear about that. It's not birth that is the sinful, right, or death that is the sinful, whatever. It's understanding what any of this means and what its sacred function may be. In fact, its esoteric function may be, if any of these so-called religions even know what an esoteric function is beyond the established dogma, which is really intended to keep people down in a certain very distinctly religious way for religious purposes, right, which may have nothing whatsoever to do with God and its freedom to appear any which way it wants to, in any form, male, female, animal, natural or otherwise, in terms of what your shock is, that you need to wake up from your stupid sort of self-existence or your ignorance of the divine in you as a certain level of ecstatic creativity. Please.
So what happens when the master is not interested in reaching the most possible people, but then the religion takes on the form of trying to do that?
Well, there may be different masters that have different functions. In the case of an enlightened master, let's say, that they understand that their body already is the radiant being. It is the body of light. Now, what more do they need if they've realized they are the body of light, which is continually outputting, right? It's really up to other people to take that to a place, or in the case of the teachings we were talking about earlier, the word is that they were sent out as missionaries to be lights to the world and to be the fishers of men and so on, which is really good, is good for some, and maybe that's the way it should be. Or you can actually leave it to God to do that, if there's a God. You can leave it to Spirit to take care of it from source by itself, which is how it may also decide to function, let us say. It's just there, because really, in truth, everyone is the potential of whatever the divine is, and everyone is the potential of what a true enlightened master potentially is, right? And so everyone has a certain resonance with it in a certain way that is minus the programming which shields them from the pure recognition or realization of what that reality is beyond their suffering, beyond their self-limitation, beyond their social, political, religious, psychological, or familiar programming.
Since all organizations need money to exist and to grow, Can you comment on a religion's need for money and how it might attract money?
Well,
to
you're
itself?
talking about the business. Who cares? It's all about business. Religious business, agricultural business, the newspaper business, the media business, show business. It's all show business. Come on now, it's all show business, right? Aren't they out there, showing, being shown, showing off, right? Promoting what they're viewing as kind of politically activistic manner, that they are right because their God is God, and who's going to fight with that? Who's going to argue with the God of God? And, it's like, it's a fear mechanism, it's a fear approach. So we're talking about making money in business. That's human nature, survival. It doesn't matter if you're working for a religion or corporation. It's basically, a matter of materialism then. Now we can get to it. You want to reduce your spirituality or transcendence into materialism and gravity, then that's what you do if you have to do it. But no, that's what you're doing. And by doing it, by reducing transcendent liberation or enlightenment into this kind of gravitational materialism, calling it a religious business, then you have to take what comes with that. That's you hold the peeps down and have them preoccupied with your materialism. Okay? In the name of something spiritual, but as soon as you get into in the name of, that's more materialism. In the name of what? Materialism. Okay? Call it religious names, materialism. That's what it is. Okay? As if God, the transcendent, absolutely, fullness of itself, needs these pipsqueak contributions that have to do with what? A particle of a dingleberry in some far off corner of the what? What system? What galaxy? Right? Right? The itness of itself, huge beyond imagination, right? Needs contributions from what? A left wing, right wing, what? It's like, maybe the God would say, would you give me a break? Give me a break. Please give me a break. So I think that might answer the absurdity of reducing the infinite potential down to, circus business, the business of performance, the business of doing tricks, acts, right? Religious acts, religious tricks for business purposes, right? Manipulating the public, right? But that's the way of the world. It's human nature. There's no good or bad in it. It's just a program. Next one.
So most religions use tithing as a way to generate income. Is that a form of exploitation?
It could be, but it also could be a way for the giver, because then we're not talking about religion now. We go to another level, which is giving and receiving. For the giver, then they have a connecting link with it. That's just by law, physics and psychophysics, right? Because they're giving to something, and that means that karma is leaving them and going to something which then they have access to. If it's good, then they may get some good from it. So this is just law of economic reality of giving and receiving, right? It's psychic. There's a psychic level of that. There's a physical level of it, right? There are higher levels of it, causal level of it. There's a mental level of it. Yes, if you give to someone and they're giving back to you, you open channels, you create lines of communication. So if it's something good, whether it's a religious thing or political thing good for you, or a psychological thing, or some kind of humanitarian thing, or some even artistic thing, you're paying for a product, you pay for a product, you give that for the CD or the DVD now, and it helps you, it nourishes you, then it's just a matter of economics. Psychoeconomics. And then it helps you, and then you get tired of it, you get bored with it, you want more. That's basically the rule from the physical up to, the higher and the religious, because of the material basis of the whole thing. No problem. Depends on what you're getting. Then it's on the individual who's tithing or offering. It's like on the customer. Let's bring it right down to the customer. Right? Are you getting what you paid for or not? And then that determines whether or not you want to keep paying or paying more. Because then they say, well, you got to get more, God is needing more, right? Not. the beggars themselves are needing more, who are running these hypologic operations in the name of humanity or goodness or whatever, which is not really good or bad, it's just what they have to do. They're missionaries. They must do that, so we give them some slack. Say, well, they're doing their job, because they feel that's what they have to do. So nothing wrong with doing whatever you have to do, right? Of course not. Do what you have to do. Just try and become more aware of the mechanics involved, more aware of the fact that, well, you're getting this and you're giving out that, and maybe it works for you. Because there's nothing good or bad about it. It's a program that you can choose to be a part of or not, depending on how much you're getting out of it. Because people want to gain, or at least have the feeling that they're gaining something, growing. So what we're really here as beings doing is to experience our growth. Now we're talking about not religious, mere religious growth, but spiritual growth, which has to do with all beings, whether they're in a religion or not. It's a spiritual thing, and it's a life growth. Then fine, and that's what this is about, growing. And growing is what? Putting something in, trying to get something out of it, feeling you are on the right so-called path, whether you're in the religious mode or, as I must add, people who are in the military. They are the same. They're not any less related to the divine because they're doing the military thing. They just have a harder road to travel. It's more risky, more dangerous, but really it's more the same thing. And then you have, the big pile up of cars, on the West Coast because of a sandstorm or something, a blackout. You're in a certain predicament, you're in the wrong place at the right time or the right place at the wrong time, and boom, you get banged. See? You get banged. Then it's about timing, and then that has to do with your relationship to the forces of time. Not religion, not God, not anything else, but the forces of time, and making sure your car is operational, and that your instincts, your relationship to the causal plane, in terms of your future, is cleared up so that you're quiet enough in your meditation, let's say, in your practice of silence, to be able to feel what's going to happen to you, because it's already in the air. But if you're so busy, you don't have time to practice, peeps, then you have to take what comes with the fact, and you might be surprised. You may be surprised. Next question.
So it seems that a lot of people invest, let's say, in their religion, both their time, their money, their belief systems, whatever, in hopes of getting a payoff of some type or another. Would you say that's an accurate?
Yes, of course they're paying for something, and they should know what they want, but the problem in most religions is that they don't know what it is. I mean, the idea of religion is to keep you a mystery. And so they don't know. The leaders don't even know what it is. See? And then they'll put it on the peeps, on the membership or the followership, the fellowship, say, well, there's just mysteries. It's up to what it is. And say, well, if it's up to what it is, what am I paying you money for? Because, if it's up to what it is, it's going to take care of you and me all together. Right? It's already taking care of us. Say, but they have you on a fear chain, or they have you on a leash. And that's what you want to make sure of. You're not on a leash, and you're getting the burn you need to feel illuminated, and the burn you need to feel levitated. If you don't feel levitated, if you feel, on the other hand, that your membership in these organizations is just a social trip to make you feel good, it's a feel-good social activity, feel-good social spiritual activity, where you have a commonality of experiences and stuff, a feel-good social club or cult, then that's all you're going to get out of it. That's what you're paying for. And there's so much you can get out of it. There's so far you can go with this kind of thing. So the individual has to be the judge of the product they're paying for, or the particular organization they are inflating and making huge. For what? Are you becoming huge? Is that what you want to do? You want to feel good about yourself because you're making something already infinitely huge, monstrously huge, huger? Wow. What's your religion? Hugeness, man. Who, you? You don't look huge. No, the corporation. It's huger than, it's the biggest. So, okay, so much for that. All right? If that's your program, then know it's a program and decide for yourself whether or not you want to feed that program or find a master and forget about the whole damn mess. Because then it's just you and that, and then it's up to you to do what it is that comes from that, which is, in this case, the burn. Beyond your karma, beyond your dreams, your hopes, your wishes, beyond your desires, beyond all your programmed garbage that validates yourself only, preventing you from realizing your relationship to the totality of the totality itself, the infinite. You hear? Continue, it's good questions.
Can you comment on the use by religion of hierarchical levels as opposed to, let's say, a free distribution of the teachings to all at any level?
Well, that's pretty much the condition of the world, the hierarchical situation. Few on top, everybody else at the bottom, right? That's the nature of the whole process. See? That's the nature of it. And so you have no better way to go unless you awaken outside of it or differently. You have to go through that, right? You start, you're a baby, right? Are you on top or are you on the bottom? Yeah, right? Exactly, you start there, even less than a baby at first. Come on now, we have to be serious. You're really at the bottom. Bottom of the whole thing, the whole process. You're the least of the least. And then here you are, you're in the situation, and you see, relative to dimensions, you're still the least of the least. You're not any different than when you are in the womb, maybe, physically, as a particle here. The difference now is that having been born, then you have the right to know who you are and what's up. Before you're born, you're more vegetable. You are not really born. Right? Till you're born. Till you're out and self-conscious in a sense. Right? Because otherwise you'd stay in a chromatic state. What good are you there? Right? What good is anybody in a chromatic state? They don't exist. Right? The body's existing. The soul, who knows where the soul may be wandering or drifting around or taking care of business somewhere else. Who knows? Yeah? So here we are in this particular situation, and it's up to the individual to sort out to what degree they feel obligated to any of this. Yeah?
In chapter 2 of Once is for Always, you talk about the subject of creative ethics. And can you discuss this concept as how it applies to a religious community?
You read the book. You tell me what you mean by creative ethics.
It was a difficult subject, but it seems to be the freedom of the master to kind of define things and create the basis for what's really going on.
Okay, very good point. So there you have, you understand exactly what it means in this case in terms of materialism as a way of managing spiritual phenomena and spiritual progress, spiritual food for peeps. Yes, of course. Then in a case like that, then we're talking about the CEO. We're not talking about the master, at least not in terms of the teachings here, which have to do with the free master, which has nothing to do with CEO, consciousness. Okay? Because its business is to transcend materialism and teach people how to transcend materialism. And not maintain, let us say, to this kind of degree, a certain kind of business or organization necessarily. You can, if you're a master, you can do that if you feel it's necessary. But then, why? For who? That's the question. So of course, the teacher who creates or subjects themselves to that kind of pattern of subjection to the organization, such, is culprit to whatever comes of that particular kind of situation. And there are many who are out here doing that, but managing it, let us say, with minimal complications. And then it becomes not so much what it is, but how you manage what it is. And then that's, I think, what the issue is regarding creative ethics. How you manage what you've created, how you manage it, in terms of what is ethically correct, depending on what system you're using for ethics or principles or values, and so on. So yes, this is part of the responsibility, not merely of masters, but of business people, whether they are masters wearing business clothing or business people wearing masters' clothing. The responsibility is the same.
So what happens in cases where these...
Oh, and furthermore, you, as a CEO, as a master of an organization that is, let us say, dishing out whatever it is, products, spiritual products, and you have to have some sense of understanding who's getting what. And if there's no supervision of who's getting what and who's suffering what, then that could lead to problems. See? So then you have a hierarchy that's too much the hierarchy, right? And the peeps are too much at the other end of it. And so the gap has to be closed so that the master's right there, so-called master, not just the CEO. CEO doesn't necessarily do this, but maybe a good CEO might do it. Find out who you are serving. Find out what their real needs are and try and collapse that to keep the ethical level of whatever is going on as high as possible. Of course, then it's a responsibility of whoever's leading the show or running it.
Related to who's leading the show, what happens in cases where the spiritual leader of a community and the business leader of a community have different aims and objectives?
Well, then that's a problem that is created by the master. The master should know enough to not create the complications that bring itself down and then brings others down by virtue of a complication that is generated. See? And then that brings into question the integrity of the master. Why allow something like that to work against the peeps? Why allow something like that to distract them from what they really are there for to begin with, which is to practice transcending these complications, and then all of a sudden, for some reason or other, the master or the not so masterful master, right, creates a complication that sends everybody back into suffering rather than liberating them from suffering. So this is why I was saying, in terms of the earlier conversation on religious teachings and their influence and so on, is that when you have an opportunity to set the record straight, to free the people up, if you come from a scriptural culture, then you write it out, you make it clear in no uncertain terms what it is that your mastery, your mastery is about, in terms of what it should be known as when your body gives up the ghost. So then it's clear for all peeps, for all times, what you meant to say, not what was interpreted as you had said by other people who may be from a less spiritual level, not knowing what you're really saying, and subject to even more misinterpretation and lack of clarity, and then causing chaos and confusion, which is the most obvious progression. If you don't know what the person's saying, if you're not at their level, if you're not an initiate of their inner circle, then you may know even less about what it's saying, and you may think you heard something, and it may not be exactly what you heard. Continue.
So would you see modern technology, recording devices and such as, let's say, changing the scope of religion and allowing the master's word or the leader's word to be given down in an unambiguous way?
It would seem that now this is the age of communication, right? This is the age of, let us say, small world. It's a shrunken world. Everybody's into everybody's business now. It's the age of knowing too much, right? It's overkill, right? So it's not even about misinformation, it's just excessive information, right, which is the killer, as much as that can be a killer for some people. And so here, yes, if a person wants to get their word out now, they can get their word out, and because it's so much smaller, you have to watch out what your word is, because you don't have to wait 100 years for people to get the message to come and take your life. Now you can get killed, like right when you get off the stage, you're right there. You can get killed right as you're saying, you're giving the message now in this age. Right? So the madness is still the same. Fanaticism and lunacy are still up where they have always been in terms of hysteria and people being deliriously stupid and insane when it comes to ideas. As if the ideas are ideas to kill other people. If the ideas is to kill you, then of course you have reason to get riled up. So when we're talking about political madness, political racial madness, Sure, these ideas really freak people out, and they ought to. People are tired of suffering, so we want to come to peace, want to come to terms with that as soon as possible, right? So we need a good message out here as soon as possible to put all this craziness at rest, really once and for all. You know, come to terms with the truth of what the heart or whatever God is, what it needs. It certainly doesn't need violence. It certainly doesn't need to promise anybody heaven, you know, for taking so many lives. I can imagine what kind of great gifts it's given to those who've taken the most lives. All right, so this shouldn't be God favoring murderers. Shouldn't be that, really. So it has to be God being the heart of love, and not really about murder at all, right? Just murder the ego, right? That's enough to kill. Kill your ego. Get rid of that poisonous skunk. And then maybe you feel better and do better as a result. Next question from you.
Religion pretty much equates with group activities. Are group activities enhancement or degradation of the spiritual process?
Can be. You have to know yourself and what your needs are, because you're born into a culture of peeps by family, right? By immediate family, and then by way of mandatory, lawful education, which is always putting you into this socialization and then more socialization. You never find out that way who you really are, what your real thing is, or what your purpose or your gifts may be, right? Because you're being washed down all the time into this kind of program of conformity, right? So this kind of process that we have here in terms of world consciousness via the education systems that they create is really a spirit-killing, genius-killing process at best. At best, it's genius-killing. At worst, it's genius-killing. Right? That means for the real potential of real solutions, creative solutions that transcend the kind of barbaric brutality that seems to be the way of the world, and the only solution for international problems, right? When the real solution is more direct relative to the heart and absolutely non-political. It's non-political. And people have to wake up to that. But the problem is that everybody's on such a different trip and such a different level of consciousness from different dimensions or planes of existence relative to the universe, then this is not really the best place to try and find peace here. Because then this is what it is, purgatory. And as a purgatorial planet, you're going to find those that are very beneath one level, and then the social level beneath that, primitive survival, right? And you have those who are at the social level, learning lessons of cooperation and possible compromise and good compromises and negotiations and reasonable intelligence and wanting things to work for everybody. And then you have those who are way beyond it. Those who are way beyond it may feel that the whole social thing is to take on too much. And so then we have to be fair, that some are born who feel the social thing is too much, not that they can't handle it, they're operating at a different level for the sake of the whole, but from a whole different vantage point, where they're not then needing to suck in, vacuum in so much of the social garbage that the social scene generates, because it is a social scene, and means, you know, the more the merrier. And the more what? The more karma, the more suffering, the more complication, the more difference the merrier. And that's really what the whole spiritual thing is supposed to help you get out of, so you can refine yourself to that point where you know who you are, what you need, your balance is established, so that you can go in the world and not be of the world, do what you have to do, get back out of it, and then be free of everything that is of the world, including religious dogma, which is just as much the world as anything else that's going on out there. Except that it seems to be more hopeful, more promising, but you're still stuck. You're not necessarily going to be enlightened by that, unless your religion is totally concerned with the mechanics and the systems or processes of enlightenment, depending on, you know, what system you wind up using and what level that makes sense to you, the individual. Proceed.
So can group activities be structured in such a way to enhance people's spiritual development in terms of supporting one another and this sort of thing, or?
They can, but to what extent? I think is the real question. To what extent do you need to be in the first grade? To what extent do you need to be in the fifth grade? Right? Maybe 1 year is enough. Some people need to be left back, and so we're really talking about how well do you know where you need to be. So, and then if you don't have access to genius, then you have to be wherever you need to be. If you have access to genius, then you know where you need to be right away, and that might be no place. And then yet that might be every place. So, and so this is a real critical issue, and that if the system is killing genius and a certain level of psychic self-determination, and as a result then psychic or selfless creativity, right? Backing off of the self-validating in order for there to be more selfless creativity. If we're not doing that, then we're creating more problems that are, again, emburdening the system, the social system, making it more than it can handle itself. See? And so the idea is we need to get intelligence out there so that we can start catching the kids much earlier, so that we see that, oh, wait, as I was pulled off the line when I was very young by my psychic relatives, elders, they saw me, talked to me, and they gave me a different kind of angle to deal with, even though it wasn't an angle I could bring to my friends or my girlfriends or the peeps. It was a kind of an esoteric angle between us. I could watch from, I could prove to myself, but at least I had the attention from a different level completely that helped. So then we're talking about, well, how does one create that other level which is not part of the gravity producing dogma systems of religion, politics, psychology, science, or art. These are dogma systems that are intended to do good, and they do good up to a point, like the first grade is good for a year. And then, boom, you want to get beyond that and go to a much more larger space for yourself. And that's what we're talking about here. Spirituality is the larger space. It's not a social space, but it is a consciousness space that you can bring to peeps, certain peeps. When you're bringing it from the higher consciousness, then it's not about any and all peeps. It's about very intelligent, smart selection of peeps that you feel more affinity with. So there's more precise a process of spiritual navigation, spiritual interaction, spiritual growth, and maybe even much greater possibility of spiritual enlightenment in the process.
And what would your comment be on religions that cater, let's say, to the lowest common denominator with a simple one-size-fits-all kind of philosophy or practices?
It's exactly what the peeps need. There's nothing wrong in any of these things, except that they may not operate intelligently enough to know that they are existing as a limitation. See? These systems are existing as a limitation, but they don't know that. They think that they are the ultimate. Christianity is a limitation, right? All these schools are limitations, but that doesn't mean they're invalid. They're very valid, right? You can be liberated in the context of any of these devotions, right? The idea is to get you to open your heart to something outside of yourself that's bigger than you, greater than you, or transcendent of you, and maybe ultimately reach a state of peacefulness. So, of course, as I have said before, you can be banged over the head, can occur that way. You can have some kind of mishap and shock, a rude awakening can occur that way, no problem. See? It doesn't have to be limited to the religious program. But too often the peeps in the religious program make it seem like their program is the only way to God, whatever God is. Which again, I have to say is kind of a metaphoric term for the total of the totality itself, which is everything and nothing at once, right? The beyond, the fact of the true vastness of our hearts and the heart itself, which is all beings which we have access to by way of being heart consciousness itself. If we go back for a second in time when we see what happened on 9/11, it wasn't about what denomination, it wasn't about what your experience was. Everybody, because of what happened, was in the same heart field. But then, as often happens, once the disaster that opens the heart to the commonality and the universality and the impersonality of the heart, once that fades out, then you kind of are covered over again by your programming, and that sweeps you away, takes you away from what the beauty of the moment is, which we have to cultivate, that beauty of the moment of being beyond religious differences, being beyond racial differences, being beyond cultural differences completely, being beyond all kinds of intellectual differences, artistic differences. We are just kind of reduced to this, feeling, heart feeling, this devotional feeling of goodness. Original goodness is there. That's what this is about. Whether you're a master, whether you're a practitioner, a beginner, a seeker, this is something which is common to everybody, and it's a matter of allowing it to be what it is, somehow. That means backing up from all the programming, once recognized and such, and then coming into a certain kind of already intuited fact of this kind of resonance, a heart vibrational resonance. So everybody already knows it's real. We're just not talking about it and getting it out there and such. There's no difference, there's no color to it. It's colorless, pure, radiant silence. You hear it as soon as you can hear it with sound or without sound. If you slow down enough to appreciate it for what it is. Next question, then we'll go to the next question.
So would you see then these kind of ecumenical dialogues between different religions and such being a positive step? Do they contribute anything, or?
Well, they can. For who though? Of course they can. Because there are people who won't survive without religion. See, because religion offers them some level of wisdom, and that's no secret. Some level of common sense. Some level, like the next level for many people is a religious step. But religion doesn't see itself as a step. Religion often is diluted as a system which doesn't recognize its limitation. And so that's the problem between religions, because they don't see that they are basically limitations of the same thing. Culturally created, right? Let's say temporally manufactured because of a certain existing need in a certain time, in a certain clime, right, under certain conditions, and so on. But the fact is that that is not what the reality is. The reality is constant, it's ongoing, it's perfect, it's always here now, it's silence as radiant fire. That means it's the formlessness within the form of each and everything that appears. That means it is beyond appearance, right? And yet it is beyond disappearance. There's neither appearance nor disappearance. It's neither matter nor matterlessness. Okay. Question, and then, yeah.
Many
If
religions,
there's a short question, very short.
many religious leaders succumb to temptations of sex, wealth, and power, these sorts of things. Does this discredit an entire organization in itself?
No, it doesn't discredit who does whatever they do, nor an organization that has to deal with whatever they do, because that has nothing to do with the individual. It's not what somebody else does, it's what you do that matters. It's not about what you see on the TV. It's not about anybody else's drama, for better or for worse, because this is human melodrama here. It's not about that. If you have access to the God state, if there is such a thing, you're not going to be interested in what you're talking about at all. If you have access to an enlightened state, you have no interest in that, or the dharma of someone else's trip. You know, the fact of somebody else. Say, good, can you get over it? The idea is, can you get over it? Not what it is. Disaster has been the master of the world from the beginning, but can you get over it, right? Like they hypothesize that this thing was created, the earth was created because of collisions, and you know, this is a turd that fell off of something else, and then it's self-existing, and then from this and another thing the moon was formed. These are the theories that go on because they haven't got a clue, right? But it's all about the Big Bang and all the turds that came out of this huge bang, which obviously was the most magnificent fart blast, and we're still the shit over here. We are still, you know, moving through space, and we're still as smelly as anything that could exist as garbage or crap or whatever it is. This is it. You're asking me why there are problems out here. Right? Right, so anyway, ask a question before we have to wrap this up, please.
Yes.
A short question.
How do you, or how should anyone, in other words, what is the method by which you weed out what may be called the universal truth from what may merely be cultural, limited, superstitious, dogmatic, etc.?
Well, you can weed it out, you see, because it doesn't exist. You'll know when you know, and that's the happiness of it, and that's the sadness of it. Okay? No, you could be experiencing certain things that are starting to help you access the universal or the impersonal. You start to like hear it inside you, right? Again, going back to the classic example of the 9/11, which was like one of the most worldly watched events. That's why I'm bringing it up. And because what was targeted was a very worldly, that means universal, like it was the United Nations of business buildings, right? And so everybody felt the impact because everybody's nation was represented in this particular building. So everybody felt the burn, okay? Everybody felt this particular burn. Okay, so getting back to the point here, knowing that this is what it is, that opens you up. When you're opened up to that degree, then you start to hear and you feel more and you start to intuit. So then you are burned in order to sustain the burn, but most people do not sustain the burn. So it's hard for them to distinguish between what is the universal and what is like the same old garbage. And that's because a shock or crisis of, let's say, dissolution is necessary. We're not saying a nervous breakdown, but a nervous breakdown may be the perfect situation for some people, so that they are then freed up to really investigate who they are and what they really feel and what they need, because they've been overwhelmed by everybody else's garbage, overwhelmed by the social phenomena, see, that they inherited as so-called social creatures, which is not true. You're born alone to be alone, to realize divinity alone. That was a good question, and we have one more question.
Just one question about religions that purport to be the one or only true way, and how we should view that.
Well, the one or only true way may be a truth for some people. That may be the only way they're going to get on the bus or off the bus. So that's relatively true. It's a program, so it's up to people to understand that that's a necessary program. Or like this one, I am the only begotten son, as opposed to I am the only begotten daughter, which would have been better to say, I'm one of the sons and you are all sons and we are all sons and all daughters. That would have made a much more merrier situation for the people. Whereas now I'm the only trip here, I'm the only one, so kill me, right? And then feel guilty about it because I'm the only one. Right? Crucify yourselves and wind up in hell forever because I'm the only one. Right? Not, obviously. Okay? The only one is the total. The only one is everyone. And everyone is no one. So the only one is no one. And if we can get to that realization, we're really much more ahead of the game of ordinary social conflict, strife, darkness, suffering, warfare, and all the rest of the beautiful ugliness that we have a genius to create here. As humans, we are geniuses at creating messes. Right? It doesn't get any better than that. Okay? Until the next tape, phew.